Hello, boys and girls. Mr. LaPointe here, and it is Wednesday, December 2nd. Today, what we're going to work on for writing is working on our leads, or in other words, our introductions. So, when we look at our checklist for fifth grade leads, it says that I wrote an introduction that helped readers get interested in and understand the subject. I let readers know the subtopics I would be developing later, as well as the sequence. So basically, that means you need to get them interested in your topic. You should help them understand and get to know your topic in your introduction. And also, you should let the reader know what your subtopics are in the order that you talk about them in your paper. So that's what we're going to try to do today. So we're going to look at my example paper here about Native Americans and westward expansion. And I've basically broken down, I've kind of made an outline of that paper so we can think about what the subtopics are and the sequence we want to put those in. So my paper is Native Americans and westward expansion. My subtopics that I have right now are the Indian Removal Act, the Trail of Tears, and then Crazy Horse. And so I know that I'm gonna need to introduce each one of those and put them in the right order. So they should be introduced in my introduction in this order, because that's what order the reader is going to learn about them. And well, first of all, I'll show you what I would consider a very elementary introduction. So it's an introduction that might work in third or maybe fourth grade, probably not fourth grade, but maybe a third grade level introduction, where I introduce my topics, but I don't really get the reader hooked. And I really don't help them understand the topic. But here's my simple introduction that I started with. I said, this paper will tell you about Native Americans during westward expansion. If you want to learn about Native Americans during westward expansion, read my paper. Okay, and maybe I could even say, I'll introduce my subtopics. I will also talk about the Indian Removal Act. What else? The Trail of Tears. Trail of Tears and Crazy Horse. Like I said, so I introduced my things in my subtopics in order and told you about them, but I didn't get you interested and help you understand them. So we're going to focus on that today. And I've shared this on Google Classroom under the Informational Classwork tab. But here are some keys to crafting an awesome introduction. And we'll just read through those quick. So you want to highlight something unique or attention getting. So in other words, you want to have a really cool fact about your topic, and that's how you introduce your topic to the reader, because you want to get them interested. Another thing you can do is begin with an interesting quote about your topic. So that would mean look for where a person who is related to your topic has said something that's interesting about your topic, or maybe something that was said in a newspaper or an article about your topic. You could use that as a quote. Contrast the difference between then and now. Okay, is another way you can start your introduction. And another great way to do that is to describe a scene. Okay, so this is where we remember our storytelling and our narration, because you're going to have to tell a story when you describe a scene and paint a picture for your reader. So I'll show you how to do each of those today. And I've cut out from my paper um, different parts of my introduction where I tried each one of those things from our flip chart. So the first thing that I tried out was I kind of did it out of order, but I began with an interesting quote. So let's take a look at that. I'll just read it first. So here's my intro where I began with an interesting quote. Long time we travel on way to new land. People feel bad when they leave old nation. Women cry and make sad wails. Children cry and many men cry. And all look sad, like when friends die, but they say nothing and just put heads down and keep going on, go towards west. Many days pass and people die very much. We bury close by trail. This excerpt from the Daily Oklahoman on April of 1929 paints a clear picture of the pain and despair that was surely suffered by so many native people who were forced from their ancestral lands during the Trail of Tears. Okay, and as you can see here, this is where I start my quote using a quotation mark, and that means that I got this from somebody else. These are somebody else's words inside the quotation marks. And then, like I've showed you before, I gave credit with an in-text citation by saying this excerpt was from the Daily Oklahoman, which is a newspaper that had this writing in it that I used, and I used quotation marks to show the words that I was copying. Okay, and let me show you, because some of you are doing Native Americans during westward expansion. Let me show you where I found that. And every topic's different, but you just got to look through all the books and resources that I've shared with you to find a quote that fits right for you, because not every quote's going to work for every paper. But that's why I'm just showing you kind of what you can do and where you can look. But it might take some searching on your own about your topic through the resources in the books that I've provided with you until you find a good quote. That's what I had to do. And when I went to our westward expansion resources and found Epic, I typed in Trail of Tears and I came to a great book here where I got my quote. Okay, and it says this book is called The Trail of Tears by Lynn Peppas. And right away, I found where I could have my quote, because when they start talking about the native peoples in this section here, this is where I found my quote and I thought it would be perfect. Okay, and they started it out by saying, this is how one survivor from the Trail of Tears described it. Long time we travel on the way to new land. People feel bad when they leave old nation. Women cry and make sad wails. Children cry and many men cry, and all look sad like when friends die. But they say nothing and just put heads down and keep on, go towards west. Many days pass and people die very much. We bury close by trail. So that's from the Daily Oklahoman, April 7th, 1929. Okay, and so that's perfect because that's a quote. It introduces the Trail of Tears for me. And then after that, I made sure I put that in my bibliography. So I not only gave an in-text citation, but I put it in my bibliography because I gave the name of the book, the author, and then said it was retrieved from Epic Books on December 1st. So I've given full credit to that author, and I have included a quote in my writing. Or I began with an interesting quote in my introduction. Okay, so let me show you how you can describe a scene. Okay, you really want to get the reader, you want to pull on their emotions. And that's easy to do with the Trail of Tears because it was such a sad thing. But I'm going to describe from my reading what I think it would have been like on the Trail of Tears, because I've done a lot of reading on Epic about how people suffered. That quote, for instance, lets me know how terrible it must have been on the Trail of Tears and how people were dying and they buried them on the side of the trail. So I made up a little story in my mind that could be of a person that was on the Trail of Tears. And that's how I'm going to start my introduction if I want to describe a scene. So here's what I came up with. And I started off the same way that you might start your paper or your scene off by saying imagine. Because then the reader knows that you're about to describe a scene. So imagine being forced from your home at gunpoint and made to walk many hundreds of miles along rough trails in the unforgiving wilderness. Some of your friends resist and they are shot dead. Others in your clan die of disease and from exposure to harsh conditions. Their bodies are buried along the trail, but you must keep marching into the unknown. So I'm sure you can all picture that terrible scene that I just painted there. And you do that to hook your readers and to help them really see the vision of what you're talking about, and it also experience the pain or whatever emotion you want to bring out. So that's how you can describe a scene, as I've done here. Another thing you can do to make a great introduction is highlight something unique or attention getting. So, like I was saying before, to me, that's like where you get a little flashy, interesting fact, a little fact bling bling. It's going to really get someone's attention, something that might make them say, wow. And so a lot of times numbers work there, like really big numbers. And so I went on Epic and I found out on another book, I found some really good numbers that talked about how many people died, how many Native people died on the westward expansion. Okay. And I'm just showing you this because it's always good to get a review about how to navigate Epic. So when I typed in Trail of Tears, I believe it was this book right here. Yep. That showed me how many Native people died along the way. So it has a lot of numbers, but this graphic showed me that 16,000 Cherokees were forced to move, and up to 8,000 or half of them died along the way. And that's an excellent text feature they have there with that chart. So anyway, that is what's going to be my unique fact is that 16,000 Cherokees were forced to move and 8,000 of them died, because that is a pretty, shocking fact. So that's what I'm gonna highlight in my introduction. And remember, these are things that should shock people. A lot of times looking at numbers and stats and facts like that can be your interesting or attention getting fact. So without further ado, I could start my introduction by saying, did you know that during the Trail of Tears, up to 50% of the 16,000 odd Cherokee forced to march from their homes died along the way from disease and exposure? Okay, so starting with a thought provoking question that highlights something unique or attention getting. I'm highlighting the fact that there's these big numbers here of people that had to move and that died. Your next thing that you can do here to make a great introduction is contrast the difference between then and now. Okay, and so that one, from my research, I just think in my mind about what it was like then, and I think in all my reading and in my paper, I write about how there were millions and millions of natives that had their own towns and cities and um, customs and traditions and ways of life before they were all wiped out by white settlers. And so I think, wow, that would be so different than today, because now there's we don't know any native people. Most of us don't, and not ones that are living the way that their ancestors did. And so basically, I think the difference between then and now is back then Indians flourished, like in this picture here, and had happy lives, and you did things the way they wanted to do things, and pursued what they wanted to pursue. But now the very few Indians that are left that weren't killed um, live on reservations, and they've actually forgotten a lot of their history because so many of them were killed that they couldn't pass the history down from person to person because the Native Americans had what's called an oral tradition. That means they didn't really write stuff down. Their history was passed down from person to person, from old wise man to old wise man, um, by word of mouth and songs and stories. And so, since millions of them died, it's kind of hard to remember your history when there's nobody left alive to pass that down. Okay, and there's no book you can go to read about it because it's an oral tradition. So that's what I'm going to contrast about how there used to be a lot of Native Americans flourishing. That means like living well, and now there's not. They're just pretty much all gone. So here's how I could start my introduction with this spin. Today you would be lucky to know a Native person because there are so few left. Those who still remain live on the reservations that their ancestors were forced to move to during the Trail of Tears. Their unique ways of life have mostly been forgotten by the next generation because so many were lost who would have passed down the oral tradition. Okay, so the contrast I'm making, if you didn't catch that, was today you can't find any Native people because there's so few left. Um, and um, that they live on reservations and they've forgotten their traditions. Okay, and actually, as I think about it, um, okay, so in order to contrast the difference between then and now, I didn't include my whole introduction, but here it is. So here's where I talk about what life was like back then in this part. Then the next part, I'll talk about what it's like now. So I'm contrasting then and now. So before the arrival of white settlers to North America, millions of native people inhabited the countryside. Thousands of different tribes, each with their own unique customs, languages, and traditions. So that was then. Here's now. So today, you would be lucky to know a native person because there are so few left. Those who still remain live on the reservations that their ancestors were forced to move to during the Trail of Tears. Their unique ways of life have mostly been forgotten by the next generation because so many who were lost who um, who would have passed down the oral tradition. Okay, so I'm contrasting life then and now. Back then, they thrived. There was millions of them. They had their own way of life. Now, not many of them left. Not many of them know really their past and who they are. Um, and yeah, that's what happens when a whole people basically get wiped out. You forget the history. So that is what we're going to work on today, our introductions. And the last thing I'm going to show you is where I've shared some resources with you on Google Classroom. Okay, so we go to Google Classroom here and shared a couple nice things with you on all classrooms, but you go to classwork and under informational writing, what you've got here is our anchor chart that I'd like you to check out. That way you can remind yourself of how to make a great introduction because this isn't on your checklist, but here's what we talked about today. So highlight something unique or attention getting. Begin with an interesting quote. Contrast the difference between then and now. Describe a scene like I just did for you. Okay, so that's on Google Classroom. The other thing that I wanted to share with you on Google Classroom is I shared another example of a fifth grade student's writing. It's of her introduction. So on classwork, you go to informational writing, and then it says Jocelyn's introduction, Oregon Trail. Okay. And so I'll just read this for you and then talk about what she did. And then I'll let you get to work on your awesome introductions because I know you have all been excited about getting starting those. So, Oregon Trail by Jocelyn. In 1803, Thomas Jefferson purchased the Louisiana Territory, doubling the size of the United States. This was a beginning of more land for the United States. Later in 1845, Texas became part of the United States. Then in 1846, Oregon, and in 1847, California. Over the course of 44 years, the United States went from a western border at the Mississippi River to a western border at the Pacific Ocean. All of these additions contributed to the expansion of the western United States. So, what Jocelyn did here, in case you didn't notice, was um, she highlighted a unique or interesting fact when she said that Thomas Jefferson purchased Louisiana Territory, doubling the size of the United States. Okay, so that in case you didn't know, that's an interesting fact that our country doubled in size. So the fact that she shared that, she was starting off by highlighting a unique fact. Okay, something that you might try. Anyway, um, I wish you good luck on your writing, and I'll be here if you have any questions. Peace out.